managed it.
We
Thank you
did.
for asking people to wait. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
So
Awesome.
this is not my first time introducing someone on their own life, the other way around. So again, thank you for being here.
Of course,
And
thank you.
for our viewers, we're just trying to do something a little different today. So there would be maybe some drama and maybe some questions from my side about how I proceed with the session today. But we have Neha here with us. Welcome, Neha. And
Thank
she's
you.
a creative art therapist and also a certified dance and movement therapist. And she's had a lot of experience in this field, which makes her an ideal person to talk to us about creativity and mental health. We would be answering some of your questions. In fact, the quiz that was put out, we've had individuals send in a variety of activities which they spoke about that they were involved in, even asking if that those activities were even related to creativity itself. So that will be something that we would be taking up. So Neha, so going forward, would you like to just start off a little just talking about the kind of work that you do? And then,
Yeah, sure, Rachel. So,
yeah.
um, so many people that I recognize. Hello, everyone. Oops. Well, I'm excited to be here. And today Rachel and I are talking about creativity. And, the question of like a little bit about my work, I feel like creativity really is the crux of what I do. Helping people realize their inherent creativity and use that in their own healing process. And like Rachel said, I am a dance movement therapist. And so what that means is I use movement, I use the body as a tool to help people recognize their own coping skills and recognize even where their distress is originating from, and then we deal with it accordingly. So I'm very much focused on body work and using creativity along with the inherent strength of the body to really kind of aid that psychotherapeutic process, because I think words are wonderful and words is what all of us are familiar with, which is why it works so well. But sometimes we need something more than words, or sometimes we need words in conjunction with the body. And so that's a lot of what I do. It's a little bit abstract, and many people understand it only when you experience it. So if it's confusing to any of you, that's the norm. That's kind of how it goes. At first you're like, wait, what? Dance therapy? But then, yep, you use movement or use dance as a therapeutic tool, along with being completely 100% rooted in psychotherapy principles.
That's lovely, Neha. So what we're going to be talking today again to for all those viewers who are joining in is we know what creativity is, and we also know what mental health is. And creativity, flexibility in thinking or thinking out of the box, or the kind of activities that you can engage in and even day-to-day life, how that can enhance your well-being is something that we would be talking about today. So Neha, would you want to start off with the connect to the brain and how it functions, and I will leave you the audience for a while and then join back again.
Sounds good. Thank
All
you.
right. I will
Yep.
see all of you back in a bit.
Yeah, so stay with us. Rachel will be back after we just address a few of the questions that you yourself have brought up, along with the fundamental of really what does it have to do with the brain.
Yeah. I'll see you guys soon.
See you. Okay, wonderful. All right. So today I'm going to be trying something new, so bear with me, everybody. Okay, there we are. Some questions that came up from the community. Well, the very first question that actually came up from all of y'all was, how is the brain really connected to creativity, and what's the connection? And that's what Rachel was hoping that I can talk about today, and here that is. So when we talk about creativity, really creativity and the brain really very much go hand in hand. Like I've said earlier, creativity is something that is a very, it's almost like the breath of the brain, right? So like how breathing is so essential for us to just continue living, creativity is actually very essential for the health of the brain. And so it isn't something that's actually out there or totally unique and out of the box. That's how people understand creativity. But really, it's all of these things that's mentioned here. Creativity within our brain has to do with our thoughts, our imagination, our past experiences, and our future desires as well. So all of these things together actually create what we call creativity. And when it comes to the brain, there are certain parts of the brain that are more responsible for it than others. And so these simple things that I've put down about thoughts, imaginations, past experiences, and future desires, another word for it, or a more technical word for it, would be so the thoughts would be our executive attention network of our brain, which is really the way we think, our prefrontal cortex. It's what is supposed to be unique to us as Homo sapiens. Our imagination is really where also questioning the idea of imagination becomes important here, because it isn't necessarily all about dreams and hopes, but also alternative ways of thinking, divergent thinking also is imagination. And then finally, past experiences and future desires. So past experiences and future desires essentially means that our creativity, or the extent to which we are able to be creative, depends on how many our exposure to creative things or out of the box things, along with our own innate desire for it. So it really is a mix of those two things. And when it comes to the brain, we're able to be creative, or we're able to do things that are different, that are based in problem solving, when we engage really all of this, these three networks. So it's about our prefrontal cortex, our executive attention network, which is, these are all just big words, but really it is about our thoughts. Our past experiences and future desires is what we call our salience network. All again, big words. But again, just to remember, it's about your exposure and your desire. And finally, our imagination. Also, something interesting about this thing about our brain is that our imagination network is actually called our default network. I find that to be really cool. And it really goes down to what I started off with, that, creativity is not something that's out there, but is actually something that's really fundamental to just the brain functioning in a healthy and happy and kind of cohesive manner, because we're being creative 24/7. And that brings us to some of the questions that came from the community. Renee, you had asked us this question. I don't know if she's here today. She's not here right now, I think. But Renee had asked, what is even creativity? And how do we know if something is creative versus not? And my answer to that is really, if we are able to problem solve, if we are able to make decisions, we're able to weigh pros and cons, all of that is creativity as well. And so the community had a lot of these kind of questions, so does it mean that I'm being creative if I'm like, decorating my room? Does it mean I'm being creative if I'm cooking something for dinner that's different? And yes, 100%. Because if you think about these three things, right, that make up creativity, even in picking a particular song that you want to listen to, you are involving your thoughts. There is a little bit of imagination. There is also, right, it depends on your past experiences and your future desires. All of that will impact the kind of song that you pick, right? And all of that together makes you creative. So really there isn't one definition of what categorizes as creativity. The only thing to remember is that if you involve your thoughts, your imagination, and your experience and desires together, you're being creative. Yeah, okay. So these are some more questions that we had. And these are questions that Rachel and I will also talk about a little bit when she comes back on. But I just wanted to just kind of put these questions out here so you can see what are some different thoughts and questions that people have had. To answer just one of them, which I actually did, which says, can everyday creative tasks such as colors, sorry, just colors, or making schedules, decorating my room, etc., does that count as creativity? And yes, it does, because it involves all of those three things that we talked about earlier. Can creativity help manage negative emotions? That For that, we'll have Rachel back on, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And do we have to be artists? No, you don't have to be an artist. And who's an artist anyway, right? We have to really question this idea of what we categorize as artists versus those who aren't artists. So there isn't a set thing about creativity. And the thing with that is, the minute you make a box around what creativity is and isn't, it automatically loses its charm of creativity itself, right? Because creativity is about non-linear thinking. It is about thinking, you know, that is not status quo. So if we start to define creativity in a very specific way, we automatically kind of lose the point of what creativity is and what it's meant to do for us. So yeah, we don't have to be artists, and there is no one way to define creativity, because inherently creativity is not that. It's not something that should be able to be defined. um, and what all falls under creative pursuits? What an interesting question. Those of you who are here today, what do you think? What falls under creative pursuits? How would you answer that question that has come up from the community itself, from this Instagram community? And some of you are here today. So what would you think falls under creative pursuits? Can you give us some ideas? So many people I recognize. Hello. Something that might be helpful is for me to pin the comment, but I do not know how to do that. Cooking. Yeah, Noel, 100%. Painting, dancing, writing. Yes, Rachel. Cooking, yeah. Again. Karishma, you are here. Why don't you tell us what is a creative pursuit? Hi, Simran. Walking, breathing, existing, thinking. Anshuma, always with the facts. Yes, but 100%, even walking, breathing, existing, and thinking. The idea, I like what Anshuma has put in there in terms of breathing, right? Because that kind of points us to question and think, like, even just who we are as people. Without even doing something, can we just inherently accept that we are creative beings? That brings up that question, which is pretty interesting too. Leap of Faith, Hi Akanksha says, thinking of different personal ways of doing anything. Yeah, so that could be a creative pursuit. So I think what Akanksha is pointing to is also the idea of divergent thinking, right? So instead of doing something the way that it hasn't been prescribed, if you choose to do it differently, that could also be a creative pursuit. But at the same time, if you follow the recipe to the T, that could also be a creative pursuit, because you're still engaging the three things that we talked about, which is your thoughts, your imaginations, and your past experiences, right? Just with the example of cooking, you're using, you're imagining what you want your dish to taste like, smell like. You're thinking about what, how much of this to put, how much of that to put. And it is also based on your experiences, right? If you've had like a dosa for breakfast, you might want that, or dosa in your life, you might want that at some point. And, if you've never tasted a pizza, and you have a desire of wanting to taste a pizza, then that also kind of impacts your decision making. So really, if what we're here to tell you is that you're creative no matter what you're doing, as long as you're engaging with your thoughts, your imagination, and your experiences. Anybody else who want to give us an idea of what could be a creative pursuit? I see Pramil Aruldos here. Do you want to tell us what is a creative pursuit? Akshita, I see you. Tell us, tell us. Hi, Disha. Cleaning? What isn't? Yeah, what isn't? Cleaning, yeah, Noel. I think also that brings us to very, like what we were talking about, right? That almost everything we do can be creative. And so cleaning also, it can be a creative pursuit. If you decide to do something that's different from your daily norm of cleaning, trying a new detergent even, or making a new detergent. I mean, all of that is cleaning. Really, creativity is small tweaks to our mundane lives. It does not have to be this big kind of monumental change in our lives. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about creativity, that, oh, you're a creative person means you do everything differently and everything is colorful and out of the box. But no, not really. Hi, Anupa. It could really just be that when you're creative, you're making small tweaks here and there that is non-linear or countercultural. Any form of expression or engagement with the external world. That's what Anjali says. Any form of expression or engagement with the external world. Yeah, that's an interesting one. And also the how you choose to engage with the external world and express also would be an important component here. Yeah. Okay, so how do you think all of this would impact our mental health? How would this impact our mental health? Hi, Palak. So, since we've been talking about creativity being something that helps us think differently, I think the most important way, in my experience, both personally and professionally, that creativity can actually help when it comes to our mental health is that it changes the way that we respond to distressing situations. It changes the way that we are um, able to respond to an external stimuli that is distressing. So, for example, if I am really scared of something, right, and or maybe I have never ever tried to paint. Let's take that example, right? If I've never tried to paint, and instead of just using like a bunch of watercolors or something, I start to just use my fingers, right, instead of some complex paintbrush and paints and all of that, and I just play around with the paints a little bit. That is a modification that I have made, because it's something that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, to try painting with paintbrushes and really complex art material. So that switch in the way that I'm thinking, right? The ability for me to think, okay, I want to paint. I'm not able to, this is scaring me. So maybe I can do it differently. And then I try it with playfulness. I try it, with in a non-linear manner. And that is how my creativity can help me react to a distressful situation, because then it's no longer distressful. I've already problem solved, and I'm able to deal with it in a much more healthy manner. So really, when it comes to creativity and mental health, it's not about a direct correlation as much as it is that creativity reminds you of your inherent like innovativeness. It reminds you of your strengths, and it taps into what you already have in you, which is the ability to problem solve, look at things differently with a different perspective. Okay, so we will have Rachel back on now, so we can address a few more things that people talked about, which was here, right? So we are yet to talk about how to manage emotions, and we'll do that. I'm just having trouble. Oh, there you go. Okay, so Rachel, come back on. Oops. There you go.
There you go. Magic.
Magic. There were so many
Magic.
moments where I was like, what am I doing? I was like, no, it's okay. Go with the flow.
Out of the box thinking.
Creativity.
That was a lovely set of inputs that you actually took us through, Neha. I enjoyed being on the other side for once, huh? That is
Yeah,
what it feels like, right? Really interesting. Also, I think some of the viewers from my side would be joining in. So we could probably just give a gist of what was discussed in the sense,
absolutely.
would could you just give us a gist of what was covered
Yeah,
so that
yeah, yeah. So, hello everyone. So, for those of you who are just joining in, we just kind of talked about a few of the questions that came up from the community, and that's all of you right here who are with us on this live. That is been initiated by Reach Out to Rachel, who's doing such a wonderful job. Might I just add? And so what we talked about is really how actually creativity works when it comes to the brain, because there's a lot of people that think that being creative means doing all of these really colorful, out there, out of the box and drastic life changes. But really creativity is about micro changes and small shifts in, from a linear thought pattern to a much more divergent thought pattern. And when that shift is able to occur, we're able to, deal with our distressing situations in a much more easy manner, because then our problem is no longer something which we're only looking at. We're also starting to look at solutions. And in that way, it's also that creativity can positively impact our mental health, because it enables us, or really it empowers us in many ways, to look at things with a different perspective as opposed to unilaterally. We also talked about the different components of creativity itself, and that was used to kind of just bust a few myths about creativity, right? So, like I was saying, people think creativity means a very specific thing, but really, you're engaging in creative activity if you have engaged, if you're engaging the thinking part of your brain, the imaginative network in your brain, and along with that also your salience network. And your salience network is essentially this part of the brain that stores all your past experiences as well as your future aspirations. So if we're engaging all of these things, you're automatically being creative, and there's no specific definition to creativity. And if we do define it, it almost loses its value, because the whole point is that it's okay, we let it be free flowing. So right here, at least in the space that we're offering today, there is no specific definition for creativity. And as long as you're involving these different components of imagination, experiences, desires, and thought, you're being creative.
I think somewhere, Neha, I was thinking just the way you were defining it, saying that there is actually no definition to it. Also, brings up this thing that because creativity cannot be defined, neither can it be measured in any particular sort of way. So I think
Sure.
just our upbringing itself, we have never been encouraged to be creative. It may be
Yeah.
in our academic pursuits, for example, because there it's all about being measured, being evaluated, and there is probably we may not have been encouraged to be creative um, in our schooling or way up to
Yeah.
college. But however, I think one of the questions which also came up is whether learning a new language is
Mm.
something that enhances our creative potential. So, what would you say to that?
I would say 100% yes. Because there's so much, engagement of our executive attention network when it comes to learning a new language. And also when we talk about, right brain, left brain, we know that language is also the same hemisphere of the brain that is traditionally understood as to be more creative. So definitely the more languages we learn, it is something that is going to enhance your ability to be creative. And this is also actually, it kind of loops into the comment that you made about education. Right, because people often say in educational institutions, let's teach a second or a third language from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I think this is the reason behind it, that you are able to encourage individuals to be creative from the get-go, by tapping and activating those centers and those sensory areas of the brain. So yeah, I think language is one of the most amazing ways to challenge yourself. And
Yeah.
while challenging yourself, the ability to actually problem solve through those difficulties of learning the nuances of a new language, you are being 100% creative.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
also in relation to, we had a question about how, whether creativity can help us relieve negative emotions, right? And so, take for example something like stress. So, if we
Sure.
are considering stress as something which is negative, during a time where we are stressed or we feel low, our thinking is also likely to be more narrow-minded, right? Because we are so
Absolutely.
focused on that one problem, we are probably focused on things immediate to the problem, that we lose perspective of a broader context. Now, when it comes to creativity, it has a strong relation with open-mindedness, right? And also
Absolutely.
flexibility in thinking, which
Yeah.
can help overcome stress. During that stressful time, we always think that, let's say, there is a problem and there is only one or two solutions for it. And trying that many times, and if there is a failure, we might get distressed about that. So again,
100%. Yeah.
thinking, open-mindedness, everything which relates to creativity can actually help relieve negative emotion,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
yes.
is it therefore
Absolutely.
possible the other way around, right? So when you are in a really negative state, will you be able to engage in creative pursuit? Now that is
That's
one.
a yeah, yeah, that's
The
an
second
interesting one.
related question I want to ask you also is, what about, is there any connection, like I would like to hear from you, between, say, mental illness itself, right, and creativity? If you look at a lot of artists out there, a lot of the stories also reflect some amount
Yeah.
of this difficulties that they have overcome. So, is there a link, therefore, between experience of a negative mood and therefore being able to engage or achieve certain creative heights?
Yeah, yeah. I think, to answer your second question first, there's just there are so many more variables in the mix than just, creativity or a difficult, life experience. But I do think, like, personality is one big thing. Access to resources is another. The ability to even try, or the option to try different creative pursuits, all of that, those are definitely variables. But I recognize and also agree that, a lot of the narratives out there about artists, about, especially visual artists and musicians, is, it's like, you hear about all of these big artists, or they broke up with someone, they felt really sad, and they wrote this song, and now it's this big hit, and it's a very common narrative. um, and there is some truth to that. And I think the truth behind it is that creativity gives you an outlet that is safe. Creativity gives you an outlet where you are able to constructively express certain feelings of remorse, sadness, anger, guilt with some sort of distance, right? Because it isn't in your body. You're able to externalize it, whether that's by writing, you're able to externalize it into, the strumming of a guitar, you're able to externalize it into the beating of a drum, into dance. So I think the catharsis that comes along with, engaging in creative pursuits can sometimes really pave the way for someone to really develop a negative experience into a creative pursuit, or a song, or a product, so to say.
Okay. Would we,
Yeah.
Neha, if can we just pin a comment about the topic? even though it's like the latter part.
Absolutely.
You just have to
We
type it out and give it
can.
a
Creativity and mental health. You would have to tell me how. I type it and then,
and you give it, I mean, after you send it out to the chat screen, you need to give it a
oh,
tap.
after. Okay, okay.
Yeah. And then give it a tap.
Ah, wow. So
So
cool, yeah.
just does this, right? So when you learn something new, you're creating just another pathway, right? So that's another
Absolutely.
example of flexibility in thinking. So when you learn something new, um, that's the same thing with creativity, where you don't restrict yourself, right? You don't place those boundaries, or you don't go by the rules, or you don't stick to the conventional or the stereotypical way of thinking. I think all
Yeah.
the latter words appeal to me the most, that safety of the conventional methods as well. But when we do push those boundaries, right, we could also learn, not only learn something new about something which is external, but we also
Mm-hmm.
learn something about ourselves. We are
Yeah.
creating a new pathway, one an additional problem solving method, and it's an amazing experience in itself, right?
Yeah.
It can be.
And there is like, sorry, we overlapped. Go ahead, go ahead.
I think it could also be, something like when we can't find, when we try and go to our workplace, when we find that that route is blocked, but we still try and figure out an alternate route to get there, right?
Yeah.
That is also, we don't, even something as simple as that can be considered as creativity. So I would like to talk to you, therefore, the next thing is about creativity in everyday life, right?
Hmm.
Because we have
Yeah.
questions thinking that, some people are just born creative. Is it so?
Hmm.
And while growing up, we know that some children are just better at some things. They are more musical. They dance better. So
Hmm.
possible, therefore, is like that one person has the edge over the other person, or is it something that we can develop, or is it something we are born with? That
So
it
I
has
think
to.
yeah, I think this is a great question, especially in our, in our cultural context. I think the idea of creativity is very specific. And I think that's where all of these kind of questions come from. So definitely, I think we're born with talents. That talent doesn't necessarily mean we're more creative or less creative. So I
Mhm.
think what often happens is that a talent get mixed up, becomes equal to being creative.
Yeah.
So, okay, this person can sing, therefore they are creative. This person can draw, therefore they are creative. But actually, it's just that they have a talent, right? But it could also be that the person knows how to draw, a tree and is only drawing a tree again and again and again and again and again. You perfect the technique of a tree, but technique does not equal to creativity,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
technique is still a skill. So I think that is where a lot of the confusion happens, that people tend to think, oh, a certain performative talent or a certain talent that is non-academic
Mhm.
is a creative person. But those are talents, whereas a creative person is really all of us. The reason that we think people are not creative is because we have defined creativity to be
Mhm.
a certain thing. If you know, there have been there have studies that are done on how scientists and engineers are some of the most creative people, because they problem solve on a regular basis. And
Mhm.
the when they did this interesting test, and when they tried to measure it quantitatively, of course it was challenging, but they identified that they actually, these centers of their brain were lighting up the most, even
Mhm.
more so than so-called artists, right, who we have defined as artists versus others who are not. And the
Mhm.
reason for that was because all of the networks that we talked about earlier, right? The idea of the thinking, the imagination, the experiences, and the exposure, all of that comes into play when you're a scientist or an engineer,
Mhm.
right? So
Okay.
it is So 100% can be developed. I think the easiest way that I would say to develop your creativity is to start saying yes more. I found that to be something that has helped me also hone that creative side, where you start saying yes more as opposed to saying no, because the minute we say no, we shut down a possibility.
Yeah.
Right? But when you say yes, okay, now you've said yes, but you don't know how to do it. So then you have to figure it out. And then while figuring it out, there's learning. In that learning, there's creativity being engaged. So we're born with certain talents, but unfortunately, because of the way, we're brought up, and the society has kind of defined certain talents to be equal to creativity. Whereas it's not that. Scientists can be equally creative as a visual artist. And yes, at the same time, it can also be developed.
So, specifically talking about depression, right? So, if a person is experiencing going through a low mood phase,
Yeah.
depression, clinical depression, during that time, to engage in certain arts, in certain arts, or even something like maybe cooking something in a different way, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
something in a day-to-day basis, if they can inculcate methods or ways to do things, the conventional ways of doing things a little differently, would that lead to an upliftment of mood?
Yes. I'm not, I haven't done a study on it, so I can't scientifically say yes. Like, I don't have
No
empirical
citations.
evidence, right? No citations, man. But I can tell you based on experience and based on the clients that I myself have worked with, that I have seen wonderful things happen when individuals have tried to tweak and make small changes in their day-to-day lives. I think, especially in the context of depression, Rachel, it's we know that depression is just so debilitating. It can be so crushing, and even a small change in that particular state of mind can be really uplifting. A small shift from that ruminative and repetitive thought pattern
Yeah.
can really be a ray of hope. So creativity is not just helpful, but I would say it should be an essential intervention in depression treatment.
Yeah. So that's a very important word that you stressed on. That is hope, right?
Yeah.
Which means that there is a solution, even though you may not be able to see it at the state where you are at, but you have that control over how you can help yourself deal or manage with that emotion. So I think some of the ways in which we also work with clients is maybe like asking them to write a letter, or
Right.
expressing their emotions rather than keeping it within, because that's just a different method of expression. Uh,
Absolutely.
Brought up the example of artists putting that into music or lyrics. Okay, so there they have knowledge, they have skills, so that is presented differently. But that doesn't mean that a lay person who considers themselves without a skill cannot also engage in creative pursuits. So,
Yes.
with respect to mental illness, or especially in the case of depression, it can help, right? Uplift the mood, and it gives you something to look forward to, especially when you get into,
Absolutely.
and you're not limiting the boundaries. One of the indicators of depression also is losing interest in activities that you have engaged in before. So why
Yeah.
not? Question can come up as to why not a new activity, something that you have
Yeah.
not before, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
to look forward to. So this can be a project that you start. It can be something small, right? Just you take care of a plant, for example. You be in charge of
Absolutely. Yeah.
nurturing that, maybe reading about it and being responsible for it could help you learn. And as long as you're learning, your your brain pathways are all up and alert, and it's not distressed, it's not down there, right? So Neha,
Yeah.
if can you also just as a before we wind up the session, if you could just talk a little about why we don't see creative arts itself as a domain which is spoken a lot about, right? So we everybody sticks to the conventional methods of dealing with mental illness, or even something to keep themselves engaged with, right? So why is it
Right.
so undervalued when there is so much benefit to it?
Oh, Rachel.
A whole different session. We don't have the time.
No, no, no. I mean, it's a question that I wish more clinicians asked. I think it's a question that is so essential because um, what happens is that, with creativity, because again of certain, because like you mentioned in the very beginning, that creativity is hard to measure,
Yeah.
right? And we are almost a society that is obsessed with numbers. We are obsessed with quantitative data. We are obsessed with, show me the evidence, tell me how, tell me why. And abstract creativity, abstract emotions, feelings, thoughts are not able to satisfy
Mhm.
that society very often needs. So, from the very beginning, it has become something that is sidelined as not mainstream.
Mhm.
And the root of it is because it is very abstract in nature. And also, along with the abstractness, creativity makes you realize a lot about your own dark side, so to say, or the
Mhm.
ugly truths of life, because it's a lot of projective techniques that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because you're able to really externalize it into someone else, and you can't lie in a painting that has been like free associatively made. It's just
Yeah.
out there. It's
Mhm.
so it's also, I think, creativity scares people, and I think that's also why it is underrated. It's really
Mhm.
a mixture of the fact that it is such a powerful tool that it can expose so much of ourselves that we're not ready to see.
Mhm.
But along with that, it also is so abstract that, because it's not quantifiable, they don't want, like, no one wants to stand by it, because
Okay.
we are kind of like a number hungry culture. That's the culture
Yes.
we live in. So I
Yeah.
think it's really, when I look at it, it's those two things about why it's really underrated.
Mhm. So, so definitely it can be something which is developed, and that begins with, let's say, if you're starting or engaging in something which is new, it's important that you're also willing to take that risk, right?
Yeah.
And put out your vulnerabilities out there. It can be something small, like we spoke about, even trying a new restaurant, for example, or a new cuisine, right? Or taking a new route to work when we're just so used to just sticking to one thing and the conventional method and the tried and true method. But just going out of that comfort zone can be very beneficial in a lot of ways to our emotional well-being. So thank you, Neha, for taking us through that entire insightful session. So probably as a takeaway, right? So since most of us are in the lockdown, hopefully sitting at home and not breaking the curfew, if you give us some takeaways about the smaller things that literally anybody could do at home, uh, that could enhance their creativity, or which they would understand are also creative activities, what can we do?
I think one of the easiest things to do is change the breakfast that you eat. I know that it's very specific, and a lot of you might not eat breakfast, so your first meal, that's fine. It's the idea of the first meal, because when you start off your day by changing up a routine, sometimes that can really be helpful in the kind of the narrative that goes through the rest of your day. And I've tried it with myself, and I've tried this with a couple of my clients as well. And it seems to be a very exciting thing that people end up doing once they try it. So, one thing that all of us can do at home, safe, is just change your morning, just one thing about your morning routine. And that could just be the food that you eat. If you're used to eating bread and eggs every day, just change it. Just think in that moment, okay, right now, what else could I make, like, just based on the ingredients on my fridge?
You're
And
probably
that's
pushing
something.
a lot of people into a state of panic right now.
Would I be? Let's see.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
really
maybe,
hope
maybe
that,
not.
yeah,
It's
um,
it's also, we have to be careful about how much we try, right? Risk
mhm.
taking has to be done cautiously. Risk taking is to be done in a way with how much you're comfortable with to begin with. We don't want to push you to the deep end and say, okay, no, now go be creative. That's not the point. The point is to make incremental changes. And if breakfast seems like it's too big a change, we start smaller. We start even smaller. We start by playing with the waters a little bit, and then increasing the amount of risk that we're taking. If something, we want to get even more basic than that, it could be, say, the next time you say no to something, see if it's possible to try it some other way. That's it.
What
Yeah.
else, like going through the day? So you mentioned breakfast, or what else?
Um, I mean, of course, trying new things, but I feel like prescribing that again would not make
Okay.
sense to to kind of the concept of what we're trying to establish, right? But I see the importance of at least offering something tangible that you're suggesting.
Yeah, because I think one of
So
the was we had from the audience was, even if I make a schedule for myself on a daily basis when I'm studying, if I do it in color, would that mean that I'm being creative?
yeah,
Or if
yeah.
I'm writing on a book, if I put it up as a chart, even if it's just on ballpoint pen, is that being creative? Because I'm just choosing to do the same thing in a different way. Is that being creative?
Yeah. So yeah, it can be, and I think maybe something that's easy to even try in your like rooms is to change the setting a little bit, play around with space. Sometimes shifting the angle of your bed can be really like you're living in a totally different space. For some people, that might be too big. For some people, that might be comfortable. So looking around and observing for you, like really using the space around you as a canvas, and that is the only way to go about it, because I can't tell somebody what to do and what not to do, but I think changing a few things around in terms of logistical arrangements might be a good start, because we know that our environment directly impacts our mental health. And so, if
Yes.
our environment could be a representation of our creativity, then perhaps we could be reminded of how inherently creative we are all the time.
Okay. So definitely a good takeaway is that there is no restriction, and
Yeah.
reiterating what we spoke about, it can't be defined, so it can be through any activity at all that you're involved in. In fact, just prior to this, we had some inputs from the audience who said just the way you walk, or just the fact that you breathe, right? Your existence itself can be considered uh, in a different way as being creatively expressed, right? So thank you so much, Neha, again for joining me on the live, although I'm not on live. Thank you to all our viewers for joining us today. Neha, is there anything that you would like to add as a short, sweet goodbye, tip, takeaway, anything at all?
No, I would just like to encourage you to maybe question your own definition of creativity. Question it the next time you think, oh, this is creative or this is not. Think to yourself, where does that come from? And what if I just change the definition of creativity for myself? Would that then change my perception of what I'm doing as
Yeah.
creative versus not creative? I think that question is something that is really worth, for all of us to ponder upon, and me included, 100%. To think about, what have I defined as creativity in my life, and what if I was more fluid with my rigidity around, what a definition is for myself, and so
Yeah.
everyone, for themselves. Yeah, I think that would definitely be the biggest thing.
And do send us your views and your inputs. We'll be very happy to discuss them and hear you out. We are all growing in our field, and we would love to have a bigger community here. Thank you so much again, Neha.
Thank you,
We will,
Rachel, and I'm so like grateful that you had me on to talk about something that I love.
which I'm, which I love too now after going through this wonderful life with you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you,
All right.
Rachel.
Bye.
Bye bye.
No borders can hold